Hello, I'm Ken Raggio, and I'm the author of a book entitled The Daniel Prophecies, God's Plan for the Last Days. I want to take you on a video tour of Israel today, the Holy Land of the Bible. In this video, we're going to travel north and south and east and west all around the ancient modern land of Israel. I've accumulated photos and video segments from 8 different trips that I've made to Israel, so this might actually be the most complete tour you're ever going to find of this kind. The COVID-19 pandemic forced us to discontinue our tours at that time, but now there's war in Israel, and so we're still not returning at this time. But this tour, this video tour, is going to give you a unique opportunity to see all the major holy sites, even if you never have the chance to make the physical trip to Israel. In this video, we're going to walk where Jesus walked. We're going to see scores of holy sites where famous men and women lived in Bible days. It's going to be a fascinating virtual pilgrimage. Are you ready for that? A virtual pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to Nazareth, to Bethlehem, the Sea of Galilee, scores of the most important holy sites in Israel. I want you to share this one-of-a-kind video with your friends and family too. Everybody ought to see this. This is a great experience to see the land of the Bible. We're going to encircle the entire country of Israel on this 10-day journey on this video, from Jaffa and Tel Aviv to Caesarea, Netanya, Mount Carmel, Haifa, Megiddo, the Jezreel Valley, Nazareth, Cana, Tiberias in the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum and Magdala and Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon. We're going to look into Lebanon and Syria and Jordan from across the border. We'll be in the Golan Heights and Gadara, Jericho, Shechem, Nablus, Jacob's Well, Herod's Palace, Ramallah, Mount Gilboa, the Mount of Temptation. We're going to see the Jordan River, and Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, En Gedi, the Dead Sea, and Masada. Then we're going to go to Jerusalem, Mount Scopus, Mount Olivet, Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, all the great holy mountains there. We're going to visit Gethsemane, Bethany, Lazarus' tomb, the Temple Mount, the old city quarters and markets, and Bethlehem. We're going to see the shepherd's fields and the nativity scene, Hebron and the Caiaphas' house where Jesus was condemned. We're going to see the fortress of Antonio and Golgotha and the skull, the garden tomb, the upper room, the Temple Institute, and so many more things. I've been visiting the Holy Land for almost 30 years, and I've hosted hundreds of people on these life-changing tours. From the United States, we usually go from places like New York or New Jersey, or here in this video, we're going to be leaving from Boston on El Al Airlines, which is Israel's own airlines, one of the safest airlines in the world. On a typical 10-day trip, as we do, we fly to Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. We meet our guide, and we get on our luxury motor coach and head to our waterfront hotel in time for a delicious dinner and a good night's rest. Most of the time we spend the evening at leisure on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. We visit the ancient city of Jaffa, from where the prophet Jonah sailed to Tarshish, and where the apostle Peter stayed at Simon the tanner's house when he saw the vision of the sheet let down from heaven, and where Cornelius' servants came to call Peter to preach to them. At Caesarea, we're going to see the amazing place where King Herod the Great built his palace, his pool, the theater, and the hippodrome. We're going to stand in the Roman theater exactly where the Apostle Paul testified before King Agrippa, who said, "Almost persuadest thou me to be a Christian." We're going to see where Paul said, "I appeal to Caesar." See the ruins of the ancient port from which Paul sailed to Rome and on to his martyrdom. It's likely that Peter baptized Cornelius and his household right here on these beaches on the Mediterranean Sea, and they become the first converts of the Gentile church. We drive northward to Haifa and see a gorgeous view of the Haifa harbor and the port of Haifa, where some of Israel's military submarines are stationed, where I think the sea battles of Armageddon are likely to begin. We're going to ascend Mount Carmel to visit the spot where the prophet Elijah called fire down from heaven in front of 850 of Queen Jezebel's false prophets. You'll never forget that place. Then we go to the infamous mountain in Megiddo to see the archaeological digs where the ruins of 25 ancient cities were found, including horse stables of King Solomon and the chariot city of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. From atop Megiddo, we're going to view the expansive valley of Jezreel, where the coming great and final battle of Armageddon will begin. I teach a powerful prophecy lesson as we imagine Armageddon taking place in this valley below. Across the valley, we can see Mount Tabor, where Jesus was transfigured. Moses and Elijah appeared with him while Peter and James and John looked on. And then nearby is Nazareth, the home of Joseph and Mary and Jesus. We spend time at Nazareth Village, which is a recreation of Nazareth as it was likely in the days of Jesus' childhood. This is a wonderful experience at Nazareth Village. We visit the precipice where angry men of the Nazareth synagogue tried to throw Jesus off the mountain. And then as the sun goes down, we pass through Cana, where Jesus performed the first miracle, turning water into wine at a wedding feast. And then finally we approach Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee. This first glimpse of Galilee is one of the most memorable moments for anyone who believes the Bible stories. On this trip, we stayed at the historic and beautifully renovated Scott's Hotel, sitting directly on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. We explored the entire region around about Galilee. That night, we have a delicious dinner, then we go for a night stroll around Tiberias. The streets of Tiberias have so many interesting shops and cafes and other curiosities. And there's a boardwalk along Galilee that also allows us for a wonderful, memorable night stroll. After breakfast the next morning, we head to the Mount of Beatitudes to see where Jesus preached his famous Sermon on the Mount. On the shores of Galilee, we visit another place called the Primacy of Peter, where Jesus met the disciples after his resurrection, and he cooked fish on the fire. We're going to visit Capernaum, which they call the city of Jesus, and see the ancient synagogue where Jesus cast out a devil, and then the ruins next door of the ancient house where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. Here, you're going to see Gadara, where Jesus cast devils out of the man of the Gadarenes. In the Golan Heights, we can view across the border into Syria, as well as getting a spectacular mountaintop view of the Galilee region. At lunchtime, we visit a local Jewish kibbutz at En-Gev and eat St. Peter's fish caught fresh from the Galilee the night before, tilapia. And there we take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. We pause on the sea to have a brief devotional service in the place where Jesus walked on the water and calmed the raging storm. That is so unforgettable. At the end of the cruise, we dock at Genesar to see an ancient boat. They call it the Jesus boat because it was dated back to Jesus' time. It may be that Jesus saw it, or maybe Jesus actually rode in that boat. Who knows? And now there's an amazing new excavation at a place called Magdala, where Mary Magdalene once lived. Here you can see the ruins of an ancient synagogue and a pulpit. Get that, a pulpit where Jesus actually preached. That's a mind-blowing sight. We finish the day at the Jordan River, where we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be baptized in the same river that Jesus was baptized in. The next day, we depart Galilee region and head south toward Bethshean and Jericho and Qumran and Masada. We see the Dead Sea, and finally around dusk, we arrive in the holy city of Jerusalem. We follow the highway down through the Jordan Valley, past Mount Gilboa, where King Saul and Jonathan died in battle. We see Bethshean, which was one of the most amazing of the ancient Roman cities of the Decapolis, dating from 5 centuries before Christ. Bethshean is the site of the largest archaeological excavation in Israel. We drive to Jericho and catch a view on the Mount of Temptation, where Satan tempted Christ. And we see Mount Nebo in Jordan, where Moses viewed over into the Promised Land from across the Dead Sea. We visit Qumran, see the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at a community of Essenes. Then after lunch, we traveled down the shores of the Dead Sea through En-Gedi, where David hid from King Saul, to the mountain of Masada, We ascend a cable car to see the mountaintop palace of King Herod the Great and the famous fortress where Jewish defenders made their last stand against Rome in 73 A.D. We see the fascinating remains of Herod's palace, the storehouses, cisterns, one of the oldest synagogues in the world. And then we visit the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth, where those who want to can float without even being able to sink in the mineral waters of the Dead Sea. Finally, our motor coach takes us up the 4,000 feet ascent to the holy city of Jerusalem. Our first glimpse of the holy city is from Mount Scopus, where we get our first spectacular view of the beautiful Temple Mount and the old city. We arrive at our Jerusalem hotel, the Dan Panorama, which is only blocks away from the old city markets, and we have a fabulous dinner before heading out for a night excursion to see the fascinating sights nearby. After breakfast on our first morning in Jerusalem, we begin our day on the Mount of Olives with a hypnotic view of the old city walls, the eastern gate, the dome of the rock, and all the intriguing sights. From there we walk down the Palm Sunday road, following the same path Jesus rode on the donkey. We stop in the Garden of Gethsemane for a brief devotional service in the garden. We take time to reflect on this lovely setting. The 2,000-year-old olive trees still stand in the place where Jesus prayed. We travel around the old city walls and see the tombs of Absalom and Zechariah on the way to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, who condemned Jesus to die. We'll see a dungeon where Jesus was held the night before his crucifixion. We stand on the very same stone steps that Jesus walked up the side of Mount Zion. We visit the upper room where Jesus held the Last Supper and where the Holy Ghost fell on the day of Pentecost. If the crowds aren't too bad, we have a brief devotional service there. We also visit King David's tomb below the upper room. Then we head to the Western Wailing Wall where we can pray and leave written prayer requests in the crevices of the wall. We go underground to see the rabbinical tunnels where we see the ancient walls of Jerusalem from King Solomon's time. We proceed to the Pool of Bethesda, the Church of St. Anne, where we sing in a church that has a 10-second echo. We depart the old city through the Lion's Gate and end the day excursions at the City of David, which is the site of the newest excavations in Jerusalem. After dinner at the hotel, we have a prophecy class at the hotel before going out for another excursion. We drink the world's best hot chocolate at the Aroma Cafe just outside the Jaffa Gate. If you'd like, you can shop and eat in the gorgeous Mamilla Mall just outside the old city. The next day, we drive around modern Jerusalem. We visit the Knesset, which is the seat of Israel's parliament. We see the parliament chambers where Israel's leaders conduct their business. Then we go to the Shrine of the Book where the Dead Sea Scrolls are on display. We see the amazing scale model of Jerusalem from the time of Christ. And at lunch we walk through the Cardo, which is the ancient street in the heart of Jerusalem. We see the bustling heart of ancient Jerusalem and enter the old city of Jerusalem near the southern steps of the Temple Mount. We tour the Temple Institute and see all the furnishings that have been prepared for the coming third temple, including the $2 million solid gold temple menorah, the table of showbread, the brazen laver, the priest's robes, the high priest's ephod, and the plans for the third temple. Then we'll go to the Lithostratos and see the actual street of Jerusalem where Jesus walked. We see remains of Pilate's judgment hall and the Ecce Homo arch where Pontius Pilate declared, "Behold the man." We walk the Via Dolorosa, the route where Jesus carried his cross. We pass through the fascinating old markets and the bazaars. We eat lunch in the markets of old Jerusalem, and then in the afternoon we visit the Garden Tomb, which is a great high point. We see Golgotha, the hill where Jesus died on the cross. And in the garden, we celebrate communion. We worship the Lord near his empty tomb. He's risen. He's not here. This is an emotional experience for most people and a wonderful conclusion to this really memorable day. We head back to the hotel for dinner. Then take some free time to explore the nearby sites, including the King David Hotel, Mamilla Mall, the Jaffa Gate, the Old City, and so many other things. Believe me, on our Holy Land tour, we visit as many sites as we can squeeze into the amount of time we have available. We visit many of the important places in Jerusalem, and you have an opportunity to purchase souvenirs and bargains in the old city markets. We may visit the Citadel of David or walk the ramparts of the ancient walls or spend time around the Jaffa Gate and all the interesting places of that vicinity. Check out our hotel. Begin our last day of amazing sights and sounds of Old Jerusalem, including a visit to the Temple Mount. We'll walk up close to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We'll see many of the sights that a lot of people never see in Jerusalem there. We'll see the very site where Jesus Christ will return with his saints at the second coming. That's amazing. After dinner, we say goodbye to Jerusalem and head to the airport in Tel Aviv, where we board shortly after midnight for our flight back to the States. We arrive back in America early the next morning, and it's impossible to list all the memorable sights and sounds and experiences you and I have on this amazing tour. I promise you'll never be the same, because it is the trip of a lifetime. But now that I have shown you this brief introduction to Israel and the land of the Bible, I want to be sure to emphasize that Israel is not merely another tourist attraction. It's not just a place to go on a vacation, but it's a place that God made holy from ancient times. I'm talking about Moses was here 1,400 years before Christ, and Abraham was another 1,000 years and more before Moses. And so we're talking about a 5,000-year history of God Almighty making this land holy. It began long ago in the days of Noah. The Bible said when Noah came down off the ark, you remember there was a conflict between him and one of his sons, Ham. And so he prophesied, as it were. Noah said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem," one of his good sons, "and Canaan shall be his servant." Canaan was the son of Ham, so this is the descendant of Ham. So effectively, Noah prophesied a blessing on the descendants of Shem and a cursing on the descendants of Canaan. And he gave dominion over Canaan by Shem. Now here's where it becomes very interesting, because that same promise, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, Canaan shall be the servant," is the very reason why Abraham became the heir of Canaan land. When you look at this map here, you see that God called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees. He was a Shemite. Abraham was a Shemite, and that means he was a descendant of Shem, and the land of Canaan was the descendants of Ham. And so God brought this Shemite all the way from Ur of the Chaldees to give him the land of Canaan, and therefore fulfilling Noah's prophecy. In Genesis 12:1, he said, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, Get thee out of thy country, which was Ur of the Chaldees, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee." That land was going to be Canaan land. "And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." So Abraham departed, and the Lord spoke unto him as Abraham was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. This is the fulfillment of this prophecy. And into the land of Canaan they came, and Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the place of Morah. Now both of these names are ancient names that are in modern times spelled differently, but that still represents the city of Shechem. And the Canaanite was then in the land. So now we see Abraham is inheriting Canaan's land. "So the Lord appeared to Abram, and he said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who appeared unto him." So Abram built an altar to the Lord at Nablus, or Shechem. And then he removed from thence to a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. Now the location of Bethel and Ai is in the same vicinity as modern Ramallah. Ramallah is not more than 3 miles from the ruins of Bethel, and Ramallah is not more than 8 miles from the heart of Jerusalem. So from the edge of Jerusalem to Ramallah, you could just about walk that distance from Jerusalem to Ramallah in an easy enough walk. And so this is Holy Land. This is Shechem, Bethel, and Ai that the Palestinians are calling Nablus and Ramallah. And the Bible said Abram there built an altar to the Lord at Bethel and called on the name of the Lord. And then Abraham journeyed going on still toward the south. We know that in the story of Abraham, he went to Mount Moriah by commandment of the Lord, and he went down to Hebron. That's where Sarah's buried, in Hebron, in the cave of Machpelah there. So the modern Palestinians claim Shechem as Nablus and Ramallah as their headquarters, capital of a Palestinian state. But I have news for the world. God Almighty still considers this to be a holy land that has been promised to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when Jesus comes back, you can rest assured he will take all this back, and for 1,000 years Israel's going to rule this property under the kingship of the Lord Jesus Christ and David their prince. God not only gave the land of Canaan to Abraham, but he also gave the land of Moriah, which we now know as the Temple Mount. God said, "Take now thy son," speaking to Abram, "thine only son Isaac." Now consider this, he already had this child named Ishmael, but God effectively ignored Ishmael altogether and said, "Take thy only son Isaac." And the reason for that is because Isaac was the only true-born child of the legitimate wife Sarah. Hagar gave birth, of course, to Ishmael, but she was the bondwoman. So God said, "Take thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him therefore a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." And Abraham rose up and went into the place of which God told him. So God called Abraham not only to the land of Canaan, but he called him to the land of Moriah. So you know the story, how God offered up Isaac, and just about the time he was ready to slay him, the angel of the Lord intervened, and there was a ram there in the bushes that helped provide the sacrifice. When Isaac had asked him, where's the sacrifice? Abraham had answered Isaac, said, "The Lord will provide himself." Of course, all the typology of that speaks of Jesus Christ being the Savior of the world, and God sent the ram in this case to save Isaac. But the point is, the Mount Moriah is become a holy site. The Lord made a covenant with Abraham, said, "Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt," which is the Nile River, "unto the river Euphrates." So this is a vast area of land in the Middle East. "As for Ishmael," God said, "I will make him a great nation, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac." God made his covenant with Isaac. It was not with Ishmael. Abraham rose up and took bread and a bottle of water. He gave it to Hagar and the child, speaking of Ishmael, and sent her away. So God put Ishmael out of the picture and gave this holy land to the descendants of Isaac and later Jacob and David. God said to the children of Israel, way back in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, "Thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God has chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth." So we have a holy land, a holy city, a holy mountain, and a holy people. "And let them there build me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." So God is preparing them eventually to build them a place, a holy temple, a holy building, and that's going to come in time. The Bible said in the times of David, he set up an altar to the Lord in the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. This happens to be the very same location where Abraham brought Isaac to the land of Moriah. The mountain of Moriah and the holy place there is where David bought. The Bible said when he numbered Israel, he got in trouble with the Lord, and Nathan the prophet told him to go meet the angel out on the Temple Mount. And when he got there, the angel told him to buy the place. So David bought this property, and as you know, ultimately, David arranged to have the temple built. He wanted to build the temple, but God wouldn't allow it because he was a man of war. God called him a bloody man because he was so much involved in war in his time. But Solomon, his son, would build this temple, and this was an attestation to what God had promised, that he was going to give them this land, this city, this mountain, and this place. If you look at this map, this is the largest territory in the entire history of the nation of Israel, was during the days of Solomon, and it reached all the way down to Egypt, all the way up into Lebanon and Syria. And you see this yellow territory. That's how large the kingdom of Israel was under Solomon. But you see these colored spaces. The orange place, whenever the northern tribes of Israel began to apostatize and fall into sin, God sent Tiglath-Pileser of the Assyrians and took the northern tribes, and later he finished the job with Shalmaneser of Assyria. They finished off all 10 northern tribes, and then later as the tribes of Benjamin and Judah fell into apostasy, God sent the Babylonians in there. So the orange, the green, and the pink shows how they were eventually taken out of their territory in ancient times. Then God brought them back after the captivity, and then we know the Romans took all of Israel in 70 AD, and they were dispersed for 2,000 years. So for almost 2 millennia of time, Israel was without a homeland, without a city, without a temple, without a priest. But in the late 1800s, a man named Theodor Herzl, who we know is the father of Zionism, began to say to the people in his writings and his speeches that it was time for Jews to consider going back to their homeland and establishing a new state in Israel. Of course, he didn't get a lot of attraction in his day because this is before World War I and World War II, and there was not a lot of sentiment about moving back to Israel, immigrating to the Holy Land. But as World War I and World War II unfolded, we see that the sentiment changed. But the real game changer happened in around 1917 when the British were at war, and Dr. Chaim Weizmann, who was a Jew, had invented an explosive device that Britain desperately needed in this wartime. And so he made a deal that he would give them the patent to his explosive device if they would assure him that Britain would stand behind the Jews and allow them to go back to their native homeland. He talked with this man, Lord Walter Rothschild, who everybody knows the Rothschilds from the international banking system. He was a powerfully influential man in Britain in those days. And Rothschild was a friend of Cecil Rhodes, the famous diamond magnate. You've heard of Rhodesia, which was an African nation. He owned all the diamond mines down there. Cecil Rhodes and Lord Walter Rothschild were friends, and Rhodes was friends of Lord Alfred Milner, who sat on the British Round Table with Lord Arthur James Balfour, who happened to be the British Home Secretary. And so this roundabout led from Herzl to Weizmann to Rothschild to Rhodes to Milner to Balfour, and it resulted in the Balfour Declaration of 1917, November 1917. Lord Balfour wrote, His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. He said, I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. So this was a real game changer. You see how these men were influential in bringing about the nation of Israel. At about that time, Britain was at war with the Ottoman Turks, and in Jerusalem, the Mufti of Jerusalem surrendered the city of Jerusalem to the British forces in that time. And we know that in the end of the World War I, British General Edmund Allenby took Jerusalem. He walked in through the Jaffa gate with his troops, took the city of Jerusalem peacefully, and it was a wonderful day, a game changer for all of time. Here we see Allenby and his troops coming inside the Jaffa gate. You're going to see a lot of pictures of this area as we go into this tour of Israel. Here's a modern picture just inside the Jaffa Gate. I actually met the man who owned that building right there in the centerpiece up in the window up on the far right-hand corner. He told me is the apartment where General Allenby stayed in 1917, and his family had actually rented that to the British government for that. This is all fascinating territory. On the left of this photo is just a small portion of the Citadel of David. This is a very historic area. Here you see the General Assembly in the United Nations in 1947, November the 29th. They voted to partition Palestine and effectively pave the way for the Jewish state. The vote was 33 nations for, 13 nations against, 10 abstained, 1 was absent. The United States voted yes, the United Kingdom abstained, and the vote precipitated the fulfilling of many epic Bible prophecies. After 2,000 years of exile, the Jews began moving back to their homeland by the many thousands. Here is a record of the vote that day. 33 votes for, 13 against, 10 abstentions. Look at this list. Who was against it? Afghanistan, Cuba, Egypt, Greece, India, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, and Yemen. Only 2 of these nations were non-Muslim. All the rest. That tells you The real enemy of Israel is the Muslim nations. This is a picture of the British Mandate of Palestine that was granted at the San Remo Conference back in the 1920s. The whole land was being mandated, was being governed, as it were, by the British at that time. They divided it by the Jordan River. To the left of the Jordan was Palestine. To the right of the Jordan was Transjordan, which eventually became the state of Jordan, and that on the west side of the Jordan became the state of Israel. And, of course, you know that in May the 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion and the Zionists wrote up their Declaration of Independence and signed it on May the 14th, 1948, and the state of Israel was born. David Ben-Gurion became their first prime minister. Would you know that 5 Arab nations declared war on them that day, and a great war broke out? But the prophecy had said that in Ezekiel 37 said that God was going to raise them up from the valley of dry bones to become a mighty army. In the first 24 hours of their nation, they defeated 5 nations militarily. Jesus showed the prophetic nature of this entire event. He said in Matthew 24, "Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When the branch is yet tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when you shall see all these things, know that it's near, even at the doors. This generation will not pass until all these things be fulfilled." We view this budding of the fig tree correlates to the nation of Israel being born again in 1948. And so we believe that the nation of Israel being reborn is the sign of the fig tree, and it triggered the last generation. Of course, the book of Psalm tells us that it's 70 to 80 years, which is the last generation, so we're living certainly in the last days. Now let's get back to our tour of Israel. I'm going to show you all these holy sites because it's more than just an education. It is an emotional experience. We go over there with a company called Ed Hill Tours. I've used them for many years, and we've had some of the most wonderful trips. Here you see a picture of us going through customs at Newark Airport in New Jersey. The LL Airlines, which is owned by the Israeli government, has extremely high scrutiny when you go through their customs. They ask a lot of questions and try to do everything they can to make your flight as safe as they possibly can. When we're flying into Israel, one of the most notable things we look for is to see Caesarea down below. This is one of the ancient Roman excavations where Herod, the king, had his palace. There is at the bottom of this picture, you see the great Roman theater. You see the hippodrome, which was the horse races. Out on the peninsula there is the ancient ruins of Herod's palace. We're going to arrive at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. We're going to deplane, go through the terminal there. We're going to meet our agent at the luggage counter, and then we're going to go out to our luxury motor coach for our 10-day journey. We're going to be staying in some beautiful hotels on the way. Just to look back, beginning in 1996, my first tour over to Israel, my first guide was a man named Yehuda. One of our favorite tour guides is Savika Mizrahi. He's guided several of our tours. Here you see Richard and Meredith Page, who own Ed Hill Tours out of West Palm Beach. This is our tour company, and here we are in the dining room at the Dan Panorama Hotel in Jerusalem with Savika, our guide. Great people. It's a great trip. We usually spend the first night at the Dan Panorama Hotel in Tel Aviv. Right there on the beach, you got grand views morning and night of the Mediterranean Sea. Down to the south, you see the peninsula of the city of Jaffa. Down there is where Jonah fled from the Lord back in the Old Testament. This is where Peter had the vision of the sheet being let down from heaven, which spoke of the birth of the Gentile church. And this is about as far south as we go on our trip, because below this is Ashdod and Ashkelon and Gaza. If you keep up the news, you know that that's where most of the Hamas terrorism is coming from, down that part of the world, so we don't get into that dangerous area. Here's a little picture of a place called Simon the Tanner's house. We go by this every time. I can't say for sure this is actually where Simon lived, but this is a focal point. It helps you to kind of get your mind around the fact that there really was a place here where Peter was found on the rooftop there in the vision the Lord gave him. Here's a picture of me and my family on one of our trips there. This is a picture of Tel Aviv, looking from the south at Jaffa up toward Tel Aviv. It's a beautiful modern city, and from 1947 until Donald Trump officially announced that the United States would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the U.S. Embassy was in Tel Aviv until that time. But now we have this new embassy in Jerusalem. There's a picture of me there at the new embassy in Jerusalem. This was at that time the consulate, and so it made a quick change from the consulate to the embassy, and now we have recognized that Jerusalem is officially the capital of Israel. Let's go back now to Caesarea and talk about the details of what's going on there and what there is with regarding to biblical history. Our first view of the Holy Land is from the air, depending on the day of time that we approach from the Mediterranean. Sometimes our flight takes us right over this area. It features a beautiful Roman theater that seats thousands of people. Herod's massive palace includes a freshwater swimming pool that was fed by a 12-mile-long aqueduct. And they've just excavated a hippodrome that was 17,000 seats for horse races, and the port of Caesarea, from which the Apostle Paul sailed. Here's Savika explaining this area. We're looking out across the Mediterranean Sea. One of the great important biblical events here was the Apostle Paul testifying, standing right here where one of my sons is standing. Paul stood that day and testified before Agrippa. He said, "I think myself happy to be able to testify to you today." And when he got through, they commented and said, "Paul, much learning has made you mad." But he kept on testifying, and before he got through, Agrippa said, "Almost persuadest thou me to be a Christian." This is a very historic site. We know that when Paul was up in Antioch earlier, Agabus had prophesied that when he go to Jerusalem, he was going to be thrown in jail, and they're going to try to kill him. And surely enough, when Paul got to Jerusalem, he was captured and put in jail, and 200 Roman centurions brought him here to Herod's palace. He was kept in hold here for 2 years, and then he testified, and he said, "I appealed to Caesar." While he was in prison here at Caesarea, he appealed to Caesar, and he was sent off from the port of Caesarea. Here's an ancient inscription where it says, "I appealed to Caesar." And he was shipped off from the port of Caesarea to Rome, where he was finally put to death. Here's a picture of the viaducts that brought fresh water down to Herod's palace. I want you to look at this map very quickly and show you just the size of Israel. It's a very small country compared to most of what we're used to seeing. You see the timeline here. It only takes about an hour to get from Tel Aviv down in the south up to Haifa in the north. Only takes about 40 or 45 minutes to get from Haifa over to the Sea of Galilee at Tiberias. And then if you go the long winding road down from the Sea of Galilee to Jerusalem, it takes you only about 2 hours. So this is not a large country. One year I was driving down from Galilee down to the Dead Sea, and I got to wondering just exactly how many square miles. I looked it up. Israel proper is about a little over 8,000 square miles in territory. And I looked up the city of Houston because I'm a Texan, so I looked up to see how many square miles in Houston. Houston has over 9,000 square miles in the metro area. So the reality is the Houston metro area is larger than the whole state of Israel. That puts a lot of perspective on this story. We're coming up from Tel Aviv and Caesarea. We pass through the city of Netanya. The significant thing about this is this happens to be where Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, lives today. We pass by his neighborhood. It's a gated community. We stop sometimes and stay overnight at the Caesarea Ramada, the Hadera Resort. It's a beautiful, luxurious resort there looking over the sea. And from here we go all the way up to Haifa and the Haifa harbor. Now, understand that from Caesarea up to Haifa, we're running along the side of the Mount Carmel mountain ranges. Runs from Caesarea to Haifa. It's about 40 miles long. It's about 4.5 miles wide, and it runs parallel to the Mediterranean coastline. And when we get up there, we're going to see the beautiful city of Haifa. And just want to tell you that the heartland of Israel right now is, of course, much contested. We know the Palestinians have tried to take over what they call the West Bank. Jesus called it Judea. Many of the holy cities in the West Bank or in the ancient land of Judea have now been renamed by the Muslims. But we're gonna travel around. We're not going to be able to visit in Nablus and Ramallah and some of these, Jericho even, because these places are under Palestinian control by and large, and the Jews are not able to go in there and give us their tours, and they're not really in so many places not considered to be safe for tourism anyway. So we're going to go and see Haifa. Here we are on the top of Mount Carmel looking down across the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith is an ecumenical Islamic religion. It was born in Iran by a very liberal Muslim probably about a century ago. He was actually exiled. They tried to kill him, I think, in Iran, but he came over here and started the Baha'i faith, which is very ecumenical. He tries to embrace all the religions, and it's got a pretty large following. I think it's got about 800,000 followers around the world, but it has a beautiful view of the harbor of Haifa. Now, here is where many of the Israeli Navy equipment is stationed, ships and submarines. I personally think this might be an entry point for the sea battles of the Battle of Armageddon, because this is where the Jezreel Valley begins at the Mediterranean Sea, and it descends all the way past Megiddo and Nazareth down to the Jordan River Valley, and ultimately down to the city of Jerusalem. About 130 miles from here down the valley to Jerusalem, and that's the valley, effectively the Valley of Armageddon. The Bible said the blood in some places is going to run to the horse's bridle. Here we are looking up from the bottom of Mount Carmel up to the Baha'i temple there, and we stayed one night. We stayed in the Dan Panorama Hotel there in Haifa. It's a beautiful hotel. Now we're going to go from Haifa over to the place on Mount Carmel where Elijah's story, where he called all of Jezebel's prophets on the carpet. We're going to be going to Elijah's mountain place. We're going to go to Megiddo, and then we're going to end the day over at Tiberias on Sea of Galilee. Here we are. There's a statue on top of Carmel to commemorate the spot where Elijah called down fire on the false prophets. You're looking down from the mountain toward the northeast, and you'll see, if you see down at the very bottom, there's a brook that runs by there. The story tells us that Elijah demanded they all take them down to the brook and slaughter them there. So about 850 prophets were slaughtered after that episode when Elijah called fire down from heaven. Now you look out across this view, you see it looks like a Y-shaped airstrip out there. That is an Israeli Air Force base out there. It's underground. Only the landing strips is above ground. You can watch jets coming and going sometimes, and they disappear as soon as they get on the ground. This is a newer picture. They're working on some new freeways running through here. Israel is constantly expanding. Every year we go, we see so many dramatic changes because they're constantly in flux. This picture of Elijah's statue there on Mount Carmel, I put it on the front of my book, The Greatest Doctrines of the Bible, because it reminds us that God is a stickler for doctrinal integrity. God wants us to worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. And so we need to do that in our modern times as well. We need to stick with true doctrine and reject all false doctrine and all false gods. Now we're going to go down to Megiddo and see this. We're going down the Jezreel Valley. We're going to see this place. Right out from Megiddo, there is another little mountain over there called Mount Tabor. That's where Jesus appeared with Moses and Elijah. It's called the Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John were witnesses to that. Here we are at Megiddo. The ruins of 5 ancient cities have been excavated here. We find out that Solomon had stables. The high elevation of Mount Megiddo ended up being a very strategic military place for the nation of Israel. They were able to see out toward the Mediterranean Sea. They could see up north into Lebanon and Syria. And so it's a very much a lookout post, a watch post for any military operation. Solomon had his horses stables here, and Ahab and Jezebel also had their chariot city here. Here is a model of one of the levels of the cities back in ancient times in the museum there at Megiddo. There's a gate there called the City Gate to Megiddo that is dated back over 5,000 years ago. Here it is, a view. This is one of the oldest gates in antiquity, and the scholars say that it's very likely that Abraham walked through these gates because these gates predate Abraham. So we have a good possibility here that Abraham and Sarah actually visited Megiddo in their sojourns, and they saw this place just like we're seeing here today. Here's the excavation of Solomon's stables. He had hundreds and hundreds of horses here, and of course Ahab and Jezebel had their chariots and horses here as well. We're looking into the Jezreel Valley, and I'm talking to the group here about the future site of the Battle of Armageddon. This is the place where you remember the story that Elijah ran down the valley ahead of Ahab's chariots. He went down into hiding probably 100 miles south of here when he was running from Jezebel, and God brought him back up. But anyway, this is a very significant place. We know that the Battle of Armageddon is liable to see a lot of action this year. In fact, we've seen that little airport I just showed you a moment ago. Just in the last couple of weeks from me making this video, there have been bombs coming from Hezbollah down, landing on that airstrip in Megiddo. Okay, here's another view with another group lecturing on top of Megiddo, looking out across the Jezreel Valley. There's an underwater water supply there at Megiddo that made it a very safe place because this water supply was hundreds of feet underground. There were staircases that goes all the way down. I toured this staircase on one of my first or second trips. Now I just let my guide take them down. It's a long, long way down into that water supply, and it's a long way out of it on the other side. The next site is going to be Nazareth, which is just a few miles away from Megiddo. Of course, you know this is where Mary and Joseph lived. This is where Jesus grew up as a child. Today, it's a modern city of tens of thousands of Muslims. Very few Christians, very few Jews live in Nazareth now. It's a Palestinian-controlled city. But we do have a place called Nazareth Village, which the tourists visit, and this is a recreation of what it might have been like in the days of Jesus' childhood. We see a carpenter shop. Most of you know that Jesus' daddy Joseph was a carpenter, and Jesus learned carpentry as a child. Here's an olive grove with a watchtower. When I saw that watchtower, I thought, boy, there's a lot of sermons in that little view right there. Here's an olive press. You see the olive residue on the wheel of this olive press. You know that in ancient times, olive oil fueled most of their lanterns. And here's a weaver's shop. They're weaving fabric out of sheep's wool to make linens out of. And here we are in a recreated synagogue. This is very important because the Bible does tell us a story of Jesus preaching in the synagogue in Nazareth, reading the book of Isaiah, chapter 61, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he's anointed me." And the word anointing there suggests that he was the anointed one, the Messiah. The Jews didn't take too kindly to that, so they tried to cast him out of the city. I want you to hear this interpreter explaining that story.
Is upon me, and he's anointed me to preach the good news to the poor, heal the broken, set the captives free, give sight to the blind, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then the prophecy goes on, but he closed the scroll, he gave it back, and he sat down because he was about to teach him. He said, "The words, the scriptures you have heard here today have been fulfilled." Well, what is he talking about? Himself, right? Who's the anointed one? The Messiah, right? The word anointed in Hebrew is Mashiach. It's a root word of Mashiach, which means Messiah or Christ. It's the same thing. So he was speaking about himself. In other words, he's saying he's the Messiah. You can imagine how surprising.
Here we are on the precipice where they tried to cast him off, and I'm reading the Bible story here that tells exactly what they did to try to throw Jesus off, but the scripture says that he escaped from them that day. Otherwise, they would have thrown him off this precipice and killed him. That's Mount Tabor in the distance where Jesus was transfigured. Moses and Elijah appeared with him in the presence of Peter, James, and John. I'm just reminding you that this Judea territory is now the West Bank. It's Palestinian controlled. I would love to take my groups to Nablus because that's the ancient city of Shechem. I would like to take them to Bethel and Ai and so many other holy sites. Jacob's Well is down in there. And there's a lot of things we'd like to see, but because it's hostile territory, we're not able to go. But I want to take you to show you some pictures. Many years ago, back in 1996, I actually visited this, and Shechem is now Nablus. But here is an old picture of Shechem, And the inset here is a picture of Jacob's well. It's actually surrounded now by a Catholic church. I've seen Jacob's well, drew water out of Jacob's well back almost 30 years ago, but nowadays we're not really free to go and see that site anymore. But at Nablus, you have two mountains there. One is called Mount Gerizim and the other is called Mount Ebal. And this was something that Moses and Joshua referred to before they even brought the children of Israel into the land. Moses said, behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse, and it'll be when the Lord your God will bring you to the land to which you come to possess it. These you shall place the blessing upon Mount Gerizim. So Mount Gerizim on your left is the Mount of blessing, and the cursing on Mount Ebal. So Joshua brought the children of Israel here. He divided the congregation into two groups. He put half of them on Mount Gerizim, half of them on Mount Ebal. They read the entire Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible written by Moses, and pronounced the blessings and the cursings on the children of Israel. Blessings if they did the will of God, cursings if they didn't. And another prominent figure about this Mount Gerizim is that the Samaritans in Jesus' time began to build a temple there that was patterned after the Temple of Solomon down in Jerusalem. And so there are ruins still there in Gerizim today of the old Samaritan temple. Now, it's one of the ways we know what the floor plan of the Jerusalem temple might have been like is because we can still see the floor plan of the Samaritan temple that was patterned after the one in Jerusalem. Here we are just northwest of Nablus in a little town called Sebastia. In the Bible, it's called Shamram. It's near Nablus and Shechem, where John the Baptist was beheaded and buried. You remember Herod's wife's daughter danced for Herod, and he made a bad deal there, and she asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Well, that's where that happened, right in this territory right here. Here we are at Cana of Galilee. Now we're on the way to Tiberias. We're going to go through Cana. This is where Jesus turned the water into wine. We're going to go around the north end of Mount Arbel, and then we're going to see the Sea of Galilee as we approach Tiberias. You see on this map, we went from Nazareth to Cana. We saw Tabor down in the distance toward the south east. And we're going to go across. You see that gray area there below Tiberias is Mount Arbel, and we're going to go to Tiberias and see the Sea of Galilee. There's Mount Arbel. One of the notable things about this is that Jesus often traveled with the disciples from Nazareth to Capernaum or to the Sea of Galilee, and so they would have naturally traversed around this mountain on the north side of it. Here's another view of Mount Arbel from out in the beach of the Sea of Galilee. Here we are driving into Tiberias there on the Sea of Galilee at about dusk time. It's a beautiful city. Looking back up the hill there, we can see this community of Tiberias. That's the Leonardo Hotel there on the right. We've stayed in several of these hotels over the years. I'm here. This picture is from the Rimanim, my room at the Rimanim, about 6 o'clock in the morning. It's just a wonderful experience to wake up and look out the window and see the Sea of Galilee. It's just an unforgettable situation. Here it is, Galilee, between Capernaum and Tiberias. Here's another nighttime scene of Galilee. Tiberias on Galilee, you never forget it. I want to show you this little deal. When you go to the hotels in Israel, or in fact just about any of the buildings and many of the homes of the Jews, they have this little thing on the door facing called a mezuzah. A mezuzah is a unique little deal. It could be made out of wooden or metal or stone or porcelain or just whatever they make it out of. Oftentimes it has the Hebrew letter Shin on it, which is the Old Testament name of God, El Shaddai. And it has a scroll, a printed scroll, most of the time it's handwritten, of Deuteronomy chapter 6, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." And you know the verse in that says, "Put it over your door, put His name on your doorpost." This is an answer to that commandment from the book of Deuteronomy. But what they do generally is they walk in the door, they touch this mezuzah with their finger, or that is, they kiss it with their hand, and say, "The Lord is one." So those of us who believe in the oneness of God, that God is only one, the Lord our God is one, this is a great reminder. I think all Christians should have one of these on their door to remind themselves daily that the Lord our God is one. He's not three. God was in Christ, reconciling the world Himself. Jesus is the fullness of God bodily, and that's what this mezuzah helps to remind us of. Here's another night view traveling around in Tiberias. There's a lot of shops and things we like to go around. There is a boardwalk there where we can shop at night. Here we are at the beautiful Scotch Hotel. This is a high-end boutique hotel we were fortunate to use one year because all the other hotels were booked. We got a good deal on this, but it's a beautiful hotel, delicious dinners. We just enjoyed being there so much. And then we go for a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. Everybody wants to go for the boat ride because they want to see where Jesus walked on the water, and they want to see where Jesus calmed the raging storm. So here we are out on a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. I usually let the preachers that are with us read the stories pertaining to Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience when they finally just stop the motor and we look around and just imagine what it was like to see Jesus walking on the waters. Then we go to Capernaum, the town of Jesus. And we see, they say Jesus spent probably more time in Capernaum than in the area. Here's an aerial view of Capernaum. This white building in the front is the ruins of the old ancient synagogue. There's actually 2 levels to the synagogue. The white limestone has been built since Jesus' time, but under that white limestone is a black basalt synagogue, or ruins of an old black basalt synagogue, and that was actually there in the time of Jesus. He cast the devil out of a man there, and then under this round building, that round building was built by the Catholic Church, and it covers the ruins of the old village of Capernaum, and especially the house where Peter's mother-in-law lived. We're going to look at that in a little while. Capernaum is from the sea. Here's a picture of it. It's right there on the beach. Jesus did a lot of stories there. This is the synagogue where Jesus cast the devil out of the man that day, and it was quite a miracle. People were so impressed. And then right after that, here we are looking back toward the village from one of the doors of that synagogue, and we see all these ruins of that village. Down under that building there is the place where Peter's mother-in-law's home once was. Jesus, as you know, raised her up and healed her of the fever, and later that day the multitudes came around. The Bible said Jesus healed them all that day. Here's an ancient olive press there in the city of Capernaum. Here's some other ruins of the village. We always like to stop and read the pertinent scripture verses that tell about important stories that took place in that place. Here I am standing on the seashore of Galilee at Capernaum. I see big old stones here and there, and sometimes when I pray, I imagine myself sitting on one of those stones looking across at Jesus. Wouldn't you love to have had a conversation with Jesus sitting on the shores of this great, beautiful scene? The Sea of Galilee at Capernaum. Then the next we go to this Church of the Beatitudes, which is the site of where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Catholics have made a very beautiful place with a lot of landscaping. I don't suppose it was quite this ornate in ancient times, but it is on the shoreline there, and this is where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. It's hard to imagine that. They've got the real location down there locked up with a gate under lock and key. But one year I was fortunate. I had a guide named Shlomo. He happened to be a personal friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He had a lot of friends in that part of the world. And he said, I got connections. He came up with the key, he unlocked the gate, and we were able to go down into the valley there next to the water, and I got a chance to preach the Sermon on the Mount just in the same place that Jesus preached it. It's quite an experience there. Coming back from the Church of the Beatitudes, that's one of the most popular tourist sites. Dozens and dozens of buses are there all day long usually, and so it takes a little time to get in and out of. The next place up the shoreline is at the Church of the Loaves and the Fishes, where Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes and fed the 5,000. It's a place called Tabgha. It's on the northwest shore of Galilee. You see this mosaic tile shows the loaves and the fishes. You'll see that emblem, that symbol is shown all over Israel. Here at a place called Gennesaret is a thing called the Jesus boat. Several years ago, I think 25 or 30 years ago, when the Sea of Galilee was particularly low because of a drought, some people stumbled upon some wood sticking up out of the beach, the sandy beach. They figured it was something of ancient significance, so they called the Israeli Antiquities Authority, who came out and began to excavate the site and found out it was a boat from the time of Jesus. This boat is at least 2,000 years old, and they carefully, you need to go check that out. It's quite a story how they salvaged this boat because it was falling apart in the sand, but they've saved it. Some people think Jesus might have seen this boat or perhaps even rode in the boat. Wouldn't that be something? And then there's a new excavation of a place called Magdala, which is the home of Mary Magdalene. The New Testament tells us on 2 or 3 occasions that Jesus preached in all the synagogues around Galilee. So we know that if this synagogue was there in Jesus' time, he definitely preached in it, and that's the case. Jesus really did visit in this synagogue, which they're now excavating, and that big stone down in the very middle of it is effectively a pulpit where they laid the ancient Bible scrolls and preached in the synagogue. Here is Shlomo showing us and telling us the story about this excavation. This is a replica of that pulpit. It's quite an amazing thing. They would have laid the scrolls on that while they were preaching. Jesus would have walked right here on this mosaic tile floor. This tile floor dates back to the time of Jesus Christ. It's still very much intact, and it's an amazing sight to behold. Next up the shoreline is a place called the Primacy of Peter, pretty much on the north shore, and it's where Jesus met his disciples after he was resurrected. You remember, he cooked fish on the fire, and he asked them if they'd caught any fishes, and they said, we fished all night and didn't catch anything. He said, cast your net on the other side, and they pulled up their nets full, and the Bible said there was 153 fish in the nets. Now, if you're like me, you've wondered if there's any significance to the number 153. Well, there really is. One of our guides, Ami, tells the story of what the 153 is about. Listen to this.
You know that in Judaism there is a numeric value to every letter. The first letter that for you it's A, we have Aleph, is 1. The second letter B, we have Bet, is 2. Up to 10. And then it's go 20, 30, 40 till 100. And then 100, 200, 300. So there is numeric value to every letter. We just read that they caught 153 fish. This you have never heard because it's not written in the scripture. But have you heard about Kabbalah? The Kabbalists say that there is a reason to everything. They say that there is always hidden hints behind the letters or behind sentences in the Bible and so on. They say that all the answers are in those verses, but you have to know how to interpret it. I wrote here something in Hebrew. You see, this is Aleph, the first letter is 1. Nun, 50. Yud, 10. Aleph, 1, 30. If you will combine all these numbers, you will come to 153. Ani Elohim. I am God.
Oh.
Maybe it was kind of a secret way of Jesus to tell his disciples, because this was the third time that he revealed himself after the resurrection, that I am God. Again, this you'll not find in any literature. I learned it from one of the Kabbalists. Another thing, how many times Peter denied Jesus? 3 times. Maybe that's why we have here 3 times he asked him, do you love me? Not only this, there is only 2 places in the scriptures that we read about charcoal fire. One is here, and where is the other place? At the backyard of the high priest in Jerusalem, in the event that Peter denied Jesus, they had fire over there. I'm sure that we have events in life that you'll never forget.
So, after we've seen all of this, we're going to go north up the Jordan River, up toward Caesarea Philippi, up in the area of the headwaters of the Jordan River. Dan is one of the northernmost cities in all of Israel, and we're going to Caesarea Philippi, which is right next to it. And as we get up to the border, we're going to be able to look across to the state of Lebanon and see Mount Hermon. We're going to look down into Syria and see a city called Kenitra. We're going to see a United Nations installation down in the Syrian border. And as we come back down from here, we're going to come down through the Golan Heights. We're going to see over into Jordan from here, and then we're going to see the Sea of Galilee up from the top of the Golan Heights. Here we are at Caesarea Philippi. It's a place called the Gate of Hell. In ancient times, they said that this cave, you couldn't see the bottom. It looked like it was a bottomless pit. It was named the Gate of Hell. It is where the source of the Jordan River is. This is where Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail. Prior to Jesus' time, it had been a pagan site where there was a sanctuary, or a temple, I should say, to Pan and Jupiter. It was a very godless, ungodly place. But in Jesus' time, I don't think these temples were sitting there, but he asked the disciples, who do men say that I am? Of course, they told him what they'd heard. And then Jesus said, who do you say I am? Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Jesus was saying, no false god, no false religion, nothing pagan or godless is going to prevail over the church of the living God. Here we are a little further up on the Syrian border. This is the Israeli Defense Forces installation where they do training. This little amphitheater here, we actually saw a group of soldiers one day going through a training course. And then there's a big bunker here that looks over into Kenitra, Syria. You see on this map, there's a brown spot over on the right side of this map. That is where this bunker is located. We can see here's some soldiers looking down over Kenitra. There is a United Nations installation. At one time we were there, the Muslim terrorists had actually taken over the entire United Nations installation at one time, and they controlled it for some time until finally Allied forces drove out the terrorists and brought the United Nations back into that station. Here is a signpost in that area that points toward Amman, Jordan on one hand, to Haifa to the west, Baghdad to the southeast, to Damascus to the north. It's a pretty interesting place. Jerusalem, of course, is right down a couple hours from here as well. Here we're looking to the northwest over toward Mount Hermon. It's a beautiful sight. In fact, many of the Israelis go to Mount Hermon for their ski resorts up there. It's a very popular place for a lot of the Jews to go vacationing. Here we are now coming back down through the Golan Heights. We are looking down from the Golan Heights over the Sea of Galilee. It's a beautiful sight. Hopefully you catch it on a cloudless day. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's foggy, sometimes it's clear. Here I have a group looking down from the top of the Golan over the Sea of Galilee, and this map shows where we're standing. That's the Golan Heights. Of course, the world says that's occupied by the Israelis, but we know that biblically the Golan Heights belongs to the Jews, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the sons of David as well. This is part of the Promised Land, and one of the exciting things is that President Trump acknowledged this in his first term. He acknowledged that the Golan Heights is a sovereign territory of the nation of Israel. I'm showing you these army tanks because Ami, one of our guides, told us a story about the Yom Kippur War in 1973 when the Syrians came over this mountain with a bunch of tanks. I want you to hear this story.
The Syrians surprised us. I will find time to talk more about that war. They chose the most holy day in Israel, Yom Kippur. It's a day that nobody drives in Israel. We gave many soldiers vacation, and it was an organized attack exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Because only a third of the soldiers were in their position, they did break the front line and capture more than half of the Golan. And suddenly they stopped. Suddenly. No reason. Because we did not have enough soldiers to stop them. Later, when we reorganized the forces and we had the initiative in our hand and we captured some Syrian officers, we asked them, why did you stop? So the answer was we saw a line of angels standing and stopping us. You have it on that now? So, being in the war, you must believe in miracles because sometimes you do things against all odds, as the name of this movie, and you succeed. So you have a feeling that God is fighting to your side. There's no other way to explain it.
And so Ami is telling us that the 200 Syrian tanks did not attack Galilee because they saw the angels of God down in the valley and they turned around and went back home. We're coming down out of the Golan Heights now through all these hairpin turns, headed back down to the east coast of the Sea of Galilee, Jordan down to the right, Syria up to the left. We're going to arrive at a place called The Gadarenes, you remember the story of Jesus casting the devil out of the man that was demon-possessed at the Gadarenes? You remember how when the legion came out of the man, they went into the swine, and the swine ran into the Sea of Galilee. Took place right in this vicinity. This cave up on the side of the mountain, they say that's where the tombs were that the demon-possessed man was staying. Then we arrive at Engiv, which is a Jewish kibbutz. It's a commune where hundreds of Jews live, and they have a tremendous business here. They have hotels and restaurants and a livestock business and a fishing business, and they take boats out. We took our boat out from here to right on the Sea of Galilee. We stopped here and had a delicious dinner at Engiv of St. Peter's fish. St. Peter's fish is a species of tilapia. They serve it full-bodied, and if you don't like to have the head and all, you can also order it filleted. Okay, then we're going to go next to a place called Yardenit, which is a baptismal site on the Jordan River. It was built years ago because of the conflict between Jordan and Israel. It was difficult to go to the actual site where Jesus and John the Baptist appeared, so this place has been made accessible. Thousands of people go almost every day to be baptized at this site. In the park area in front of the building, you have all these biblical inscriptions. Let me read this verse to you because it's in all the major languages of the Bible. It's on this wall. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "Thou art my beloved Son, with thee I am well pleased." And so this is a testimony. This location is a testimony in Israel that Jesus is the Son of God. And it's in every language right here at the Yardenit baptismal site. We go down on the river, and the bathhouses there we were able to change into baptismal robes. And I've been fortunate over the many years to baptize well over 100 people, most of them for the first time in Jesus' name for the remission of their sins. And it's an exciting event for everybody that does that. I had the privilege 1 year to baptize both my sons and two of my granddaughters. That was an exciting thing. Here's the bathhouses, the souvenir shop, and all on the Jordan River. Then we got our last night at Tiberias. Wake up in the morning. This is our last view of the Sea of Galilee before we head south down the Jordan Valley. We're going to see the mountains of Israel on the right and the state of Jordan on the left as we traverse down beside the Jordan River. We're going to see around the area of Jericho, we're going to see the Mount of Temptation. This is where Jesus was tempted by Satan for 40 days and nights. There is a monastery up on the side of that mountain where Catholic monks now stay, but be that as it may, this is the place where Jesus was tempted of the devil. You're going to see Jericho from a distance. In old days, we used to stop at Jericho, but now that it's under Palestinian control, it's not so friendly. The Jewish guides are reluctant to go into this area now. But we did in the old days go to this Jericho Temptation restaurant, had some very delicious food in this restaurant, and we went out to see the stones of the walls of Jericho. Everybody knows the story how Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls fell after they marched around the city for 7 days. Here's some of the excavations of the old ancient walls of Jericho. As we leave Jericho and head down toward the Dead Sea, we're going to see Mount Gilboa on the right. The significance of this mountain is that this is where King Saul and Jonathan died in battle after he consulted with the witch of Endor. This is where Saul and Jonathan passed away. And then right just above Mount Gilboa is this Roman excavation called Bet Shean. It's the largest excavation of Roman ruins in all of Israel. It's just north of Mount Gilboa, but it's where, after Saul and Jonathan were killed on Gilboa, the Philistines brought their bodies here to Bet Shean, and they impaled their bodies up on the side of this mountain for everybody to see, to bring shame and disgrace to King Saul and Jonathan because the Philistines had whipped them. It's an amazing city. They say that I think the population in ancient times of this city was about 25,000 people. It had a Roman temple there, and it had a lot of interesting artifacts around there. Now we're back on the road headed to Qumran. Qumran is the site where the Essene scribes once lived. There was a large community of Essenes who kept copies of the Bible. And Jesus knew and met and had dealings with the Essenes in his time. We're going to see the site where the Essenes lived and where the Dead Sea Scrolls were finally found. You remember the story, the shepherds that were keeping their flocks in this area. One of the children threw a rock into this cave, and he heard shards of pottery breaking, and he knew there must be something of significance in there, and they went in there and they found these scrolls, and they found out they had great ancient significance. They turned out to be excerpts from the book of Isaiah that was over 2,000 years old, and so now they're in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem at the Book of the Scroll. Now, everywhere you go, you're gonna find camels on Jerusalem Temple Mount, and out here in the desert, you see these people trying to get you to ride their camels. My guide always said, don't get on these camels, they have fleas. And so I don't know if that's just an excuse to save time, but I can tell you if they've got fleas, I don't want to ride them. As we go down the border of Jordan on the way to the Dead Sea, we're going to see the actual place where Jesus was baptized by John. It's a place called Bethabara. We actually have to go through the border fence to see this. We have to go into Jordan because it's actually in Jordanian territory. It's the actual site where John baptized Jesus. More than that, it is also the place where Joshua crossed the Jordan with the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember where he put the 12 stones in the river? Right in this area is where Joshua brought the children of Israel across Jordan at flood stage. I don't think there's any bathhouses or anything around here, so it's not capable of large numbers of people being baptized. Some people do that. We were riding on the bus down from this area to the Dead Sea, and I was on the microphone on the bus reading the book of Samuel to the tour group, and I read how that David, before he was king, fled from King Saul to a place called En-Gedi, and the verse said Saul went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. On the rocks of the wild goats. And when I looked up from the scripture, I saw these wild goats running across the highway in En-Gedi. I thought, my word, what a coincidence. Those goats must be the great-great-grandchildren of the goats that David saw almost 3,000 years ago. Wouldn't that be something? And here we are at the Dead Sea, looking across into Jordan at Mount Nebo. You see a little bitty small building up on the top. This marks the spot where Moses died. He also was able to look across the Dead Sea into the Holy Land, into the Promised Land. This is the last place that Moses saw. But actually, it's only maybe 30 miles max from here to the city of Jerusalem as a crow flies. And if you look at this map, you can see that Mount Nebo is exactly the same parallel latitude as Jerusalem is. So if Moses had good eyes and if it was a clear day, he just might have seen Jerusalem when he looked across into the Promised Land. Then the next stop is at the Dead Sea. We see this place called Masada. In ancient times, it was a summer palace of King Herod. Right on the front niche of that mountain, there were Herod's palace and a great installation there. Troops lived on top of the mountain, but it was deserted in Jesus' time. And when the Romans came to destroy Jerusalem in 70 A.D., there were about 900 Jews that fled from Jerusalem to take shelter on the top of this mountain. And they lived here for 2 or 3 years before the Romans came. You see this land bridge down on the right. The Roman soldiers took months to build this land bridge so they could go up on the top of the mountain and conquer these Jews, but they found out when they got to the top of the mountain, the Jews decided they did not want to be captured. The men didn't want their wives and daughters to be raped and plundered by these Romans, and they didn't want to be slaves to the Romans. So when the Roman soldiers got to the top of Masada, they were all dead. They'd either killed one another or they committed suicide. This cable car takes us to the top of Masada. We take a tour and see all that installation up there. There's still ruins of the ancient walls, and you can see the Dead Sea from the top of the mountain. It's quite an interesting place. And so now we're at the Dead Sea, and I have to tell you that since my first view of this almost 30 years ago, the Dead Sea is very much smaller than it used to be. It's evaporating, and it's only about half the size that it was even 30 years ago. And it still has places where people can go. As you know, it's a mineral rich sea, salt water, and other minerals. They extract a lot of these minerals. It's one of the great sources of minerals in all the world. But when you go to get in the water, you can't sink because the minerals make you float. And so a lot of people go here and they float on the waters of the Dead Sea for just a unique experience. Finally, we're going to leave this area. We're going to go back up to Qumran and take a left and go through the desert up to the city of Jerusalem. And as the sun goes down in the evening, we're in our tour bus approaching the city of Jerusalem, and there's hardly anything in the world to compare to your first glimpse of the holy city. Here it is at sundown, the beautiful colors of the city of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, the Valley of Kidron, the Mount of Olives, the Gethsemane, so many things here to talk about. We will. And then we drive around to the west side of town. We see on the side of the Jaffa gate, there's the King David Hotel, the big bright yellow building there. The little tower on the side, the right side of King David Hotel is the Jerusalem YMCA. We're going to stay at a hotel just off this photograph to the right, the Dan Panorama Hotel. This is our hotel for several days while we're staying in Jerusalem, visiting around this area, and down to Bethlehem and Hebron and other places. This is the lobby of the Dan Panorama, the huge dining room. It's a beautiful place to be. Watch this little video of all these Jewish rabbis celebrating the Sabbath. It's quite an experience. Everything in Jerusalem, you get a good Jewish feeling when you see these things. Looking from our hotel back toward the old city, you see over in the far right there is the Dome of the Rock. The old city of Jerusalem is there on the right-hand side of this photograph. In the far distance, you see Mount Scopus. Mount Scopus is where the Hebrew University, over to the right of that is the Mormon University. Of course, Jerusalem is a vast city of over 1 million people nowadays. It's a beautiful city. A lot of modern things taking place. Here's another aerial view looking up from above Bethany, above the Mount of Olives, looking down on the Temple Mount. This is one of my groups. I think this is the 2015 group. I want you to see this aerial view of Jerusalem, and the topography of this area is a testimony to the name of God. I want you to see 2 mountains and 3 valleys in this photograph. First, I want you to see Mount Moriah, which is, of course, the Temple Mount. You see the Temple Mount in this photograph. Then over to the left, you see Mount Zion. The Temple Mount is Mount Moriah, and the Jewish quarter of the old city is on Mount Zion. So there's 2 hills here. Most of the Jews in the old city live there on Mount Zion. And, of course, the Temple Mount is on Mount Moriah. And we're looking at this side, we're looking at the foothills of both Moriah and Zion. Now, between these 2 mountains are valleys. On the right side is the Valley of Jehoshaphat, or the Kidron Valley, and on the left side is the Valley of Gehenna. The Valley of Gehenna swings around across the bottom, and it has many names. It's called the Valley of Gehenna, the Valley of Hinnom, the Valley of Tophet, the Valley of Hell, and it forms a W, those 3 valleys. The middle valley is the Tyropian Valley, and that valley goes up besides the left side of the Temple Mount, and that's where the Western Wall, the Prayer Wall, the Wailing Wall is at in the Tyropian Valley. And so this is a fulfillment of a prophecy. 1 Kings 11 says, David my servant may have a light always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen me to put my name there. Now we know the name of Jesus is going to be inscribed on these mountains when Jesus comes back, but for now we have this Old Testament name of El Shaddai emblazoned on the foothills of Jerusalem. The Hebrew letter Shin is the ancient name of God, Shaddai, or El Shaddai, God Almighty. And so God has made himself good for his word here. Here you see that same line art emblazoned on the map or the aerial photograph, and that's how it works. The Hebrew letter Shin is emblazoned on the mountains of Israel. Here's an old picture, 100-year-old picture of Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock. Here's as it stands today with the Mount of Olives in the background. If you go inside, now they don't allow anybody but Muslims in here anymore, but 25, 30 years ago, I was able to go in here. I've seen this rock. They claim this is the rock where Abraham offered up Isaac. Of course, the Lord intervened and he didn't have to kill Isaac, but this is the place where God chose Moriah. It's also, we get a aerial view from the top of the dome looking down on the rock. That's why it's called the Dome of the Rock. It's the rock where Abraham offered Isaac. Of course, the Muslims have hijacked this narrative, and they say this mountain is important. It's the third most holy site in Islam because they say Muhammad ascended into heaven here on a flying horse named El Barak. But we know the truth of the matter. The Bible said that not only did Abraham appear here, but God sent David here. When David numbered Israel, the prophet sent him here to meet the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord told David to buy this place, the threshing floor of Ornan. So he met with Ornan and he purchased the threshing floor of Ornan. So King David actually has the title deed to the Temple Mount because God told him to buy it back in the day. Britannica tells us that the Dome of the Rock's grand scale and lavish decoration may have been intended to rival that of the Christian holy buildings in Jerusalem, especially the domed Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Its Arabic inscriptions, which present a selection of the Quranic passages and paraphrases, emphasizes the unity of God, but it rejects the Christian doctrine of the Trinity or the divinity of Jesus. So now, I don't accept the Trinity doctrine because I know the Lord is one Spirit and He's incarnate in the body of Jesus Christ. God is the divine Spirit is the Father and the Son is a human in which He dwells. So the only duality here is divine and human. When you see God, when the Father speaks to the Son, it's the divinity speaking to the humanity and the humanity speaking to the divinity. But it's one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So, but the Muslims defile that. They say God is one. He has no companion. Now, all this is on the Arabic inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock. They say He is God. He is one. He has no companion. He does not beget, and He is not begotten. So the Muslims deny the birth of Jesus Christ as anything divine. They say God is one and not three, and that Jesus was an apostle of God in His Word and not His Son. So I'll refer you to the book of 1 John, where John said, any man that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is Antichrist. If you don't believe that Jesus Christ is God with us, if you don't believe that Jesus is the incarnation of the Godhead, if He's not Emmanuel, God with us, then you are an Antichrist. And that's what these Muslim spirits are. They're Antichrist. This is the dome looking from the Jewish quarter, looking across the western wall and across the ramp that goes up to the Temple Mount. We go up that ramp when we visit the top of the Temple Mount. We've been up there with a lot of groups over the years. A few of the groups we got into the dome. We're not able to go in the dome anymore, but there is this little cupola here that's very significant. I want to talk to you about this because this is where they say the Ark of the Covenant once sat right there where that little dome was, which means that would be where the holy place was. The most holy place was right there, and that tells us that the temple was not where the dome is. The temple was beside the location of the dome. If you look at this little picture here, you see that dome marks the spot where the Ark of the Covenant once sat. I'll show you a map that shows you where the dome is and where the cupola, the Dome of the Spirits, is, and you see it's directly in front of the eastern gate. That's where the third temple will be sitting. I want you to look at this map and see how that the temple did not sit in the place of the dome, but you see where the cupola is. This marks where the holy place was, where the Ark of the Covenant was set, is directly in front of the eastern gate. And so when they build the third temple, it will be easy enough to build the third temple directly in front of the eastern gate, and it will not be necessary to take down the Dome of the Rock. And that's significant. A lot of the Jews believe the dome has to come down, but I talked with Gershon Solomon, who was the chairman of the Temple Mount Faithful, and I asked him, I said, do you think the dome has got to come down? He said, no. He said the temple sat directly in front of the eastern gate, and he explained about this Dome of the Spirits. And he also said all you have to do is look at all the cemetery graves on Mount of Olives. All of them point toward the eastern gate. So the Jews in the Old Testament were taught that Messiah would come through the eastern gate eventually. And so when they were buried, they wanted to be buried there so that in the resurrection they would be the first to see the Messiah come through the eastern gate. So the graves are another confirmation that the temple sat directly in front of the eastern gate. I will tell you that this is exactly where Jesus will come back when he comes back at the Battle of Armageddon. He's going to sit down. The Bible said the Mount of Olives is going to split open to the north and the south. He's going to open the eastern gate, and Jesus with all of his saints and angels are going to congregate right here on the Temple Mount. And he's going to defeat the beast and the false prophet. He's going to cast them both alive into a lake of fire, probably down to the south of this mountain in the valley of Gehenna. And then from this place, we're going to crown Jesus Christ King of kings and Lord of lords. For 1,000 years, he's going to rule the world from Jerusalem. Now, I say that he takes the beast, the false prophet, according to Revelation 19:20. He's going to cast them alive into the lake of fire. I want you to look here. Up on the right is the Mount of Olives where Jesus had Gethsemane. On the left is the Temple Mount, which is Moriah. This valley, the valley of Jehoshaphat, or the Kidron Valley, flows down into the valley of Gehenna, or Tophet, or Hinnom. And it was in ancient times before David conquered it, it was where the pagans offered their child sacrifices to their false god Molech. And in the days of Israel, it was a trash dump, a constantly perpetual burning heap, and so it's called the Valley of Hell by some. And I personally have a feeling that this is where Jesus will cast the beast and the false prophet. If you read the last 2 verses of the book of Isaiah, you'll see that the Bible said their bodies are going to burn for that whole 1,000 years. People are going to come watch their bodies burn for 1,000 years. They won't be consumed, as a testimony of the power of Jesus Christ to destroy the beast and the false prophet. So, I want you to look at this map of ancient Jerusalem. You see that this was how it looked 34 years before Christ in the days of Herod. Here is a depiction of the ancient walls of the old city. The white block here is the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock sits right in the big of that white space, and the eastern gate is in the middle of that white space. And then there's another gate up on that eastern wall. It's called the Lion Gate. We're going to show you that in a minute, because we're going to go in the Lion Gate to see the Via Dolorosa, the path that Jesus took to Calvary, out the Damascus Gate on the north. Herod's Gate is there in the Muslim quarter on the north. The Christian section has a gate over on the left that's called the New Gate. The ancient, most notable gate of all is the Jaffa Gate on the west side. It goes out toward Tel Aviv and the city of Jaffa. And then on the south end, you have the Zion Gate that comes out of the Jewish quarter. And just below the Zion Gate is the Catholic Church of the Dormition, where they say that Mary ascended to heaven, which she didn't. And there's also right outside the Zion Gate is where the upper room and the tomb of David are now. And then you see the Dung Gate here comes out of the Tyropian Valley, comes out from the Wailing Wall, Western Wall area down into the city of David. So we're going to look at all these gates as we go through these pictures. Once we've been walking around on the Temple Mount and seen the Dome of the Rock and all, we have to exit through the Muslim quarter. And as you see, there's Israeli soldiers always looking out to keep trouble from taking place, as the Jews and the Muslims conflict each other so many times. Here we are looking back from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives. That is the Church of all nations. Inside this Catholic church is a stone, which they say is the place where Jesus prayed, right next to the Garden of Gethsemane. We're going to see, as we tour around this area, we're going to see the olive trees back from those days. They're going to see the Eastern Gate. This was stoned up by the Muslims back in the 7th century. They planted Muslim cemetery there to keep Messiah from coming through a cemetery, but we know it's not going to stop Jesus. Here's a picture of me in front of the Eastern Gate down in the Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane. I want you to see this white building here. We're on top of Olivet, looking over to the north, over toward the Lion Gate. That white building there is called the Church of St. Stephen. This is a marker where Stephen was martyred. You remember, young Stephen was the first martyr of the early church. The Apostle Paul, before he was converted, gave witness to Stephen's martyrdom. And then we see on the south end of the Temple Mount, we're looking off, you see that gray dome over the center right. That is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then we see the slopes descending down off the Temple Mount, the southern steps that was called Solomon's Porch in ancient times. That was the entrance. That's where they bought their sacrifices. They took baths in these ritual baths down below here, and they entered in there at one time. It used to be a huge place called Solomon's Porch, was a big pavilion across the south end of the Temple Mount. But back over to your left is the city of David. You see that tower over on the left side is the Church of the Dormition, and those trees right there below the Church of the Dormition is where the upper room and the tomb of David all sits. That wall that goes up there to your left is the wall where the Zion Gate is. Right in the center of this picture is the Jewish quarter of Old Jerusalem. on a Friday, the Muslims gather here to pray because this Temple Mount is the third most holy site in the Islamic faith. Of course, Mecca and Medina are both in Saudi Arabia, so the third place is Jerusalem, and they claim this is a place where Muhammad ascended to heaven on his flying horse, Al-Buraq. But we know that the Quran does not support this belief because the Quran taught that Muhammad had a dream that he went to a faraway city. It doesn't even name Jerusalem by name, nor does it actually say that Muhammad rode to heaven on a horse. It only says that it was a dream. And so all this is built on a myth. So there's all these thousands of Muslims praying on the Temple Mount. Meanwhile, the Jews pray down at the Western Wall because the Western Wall is the closest place where the Jews are allowed to visit their holy site. They don't generally go up to the top and pray, except they're very brave to do so. Here is an example how they prayed. This was on the holy day, the Feast of Shavuot, which celebrates the giving of the law at Sinai to Moses. Hundreds of thousands of people sometimes gather on big events. I think when the war started after the October 7th Hamas attack, there was a vast multitude of Jews out here praying because they knew they were headed into war. But this is the Western Wall. If you look in the very center of this picture, you see an archway on the left end of the Wailing Wall. That at one time that arch was 28 feet high. Now it's only just about 10 feet high. The biggest part of the terrain has been covered up. It's about 20 or 30 feet deep in most places. From what it's shallower today than it used to be because so much rubble and ruin has accumulated over 2,000 years. But in that place, they have gone down and excavated. We see the rabbinical tunnels have gone down all the way down that wall over to the north end of that wall and opens up into the Muslim quarters, and they've discovered the place where Solomon used to enter the gate unto the Holy Temple, and it was a great place. Now the Jews didn't always have dominion over this Temple Mount. Not until the 67 war, they conquered Jerusalem away from the Jordanians. This picture was taken during the 67 war, and I've circled Gerson Solomon in this picture because he was a young soldier at that time, and a couple of his buddies ran up on top of the Dome of the Rock, and they planted a Jewish flag, an Israeli flag, on the top of the Dome of the Rock. Well, General Moshe Dayan called him and said, "You got to take that flag down. You're going to start World War III." And so he forbade them to leave the Israeli flag on top of the Dome of the Rock. And that so upset Gerson Solomon because he was a witness to all this. He said he felt like God spoke to him at that time and said that he needed to spend the rest of his life doing everything in his power to promote the building of the third temple. Here's Gerson. I've met Gerson on multiple occasions. He and I have talked by email and letter on many occasions. I asked him point blank, did he think that the dome had to be taken down? He said no, that the dome was not where the temple's supposed to be. So anyway, I think he died about a year ago. But in his day, Gerson had cornerstones made up for the third temple. He was that aggressive. He was trying to do everything in his power to get the third temple built. So at every year, he would put those stones up on an 18-wheeler and he'd take them around town to try to raise awareness among the Israelis of their need to build the third temple. At one point in time, he set these two stones out on a roundabout in the middle of a city intersection, and unfortunately somebody came and stole those stones. It's hard to believe, but they did. They stole those stones off that traffic circle, and he had to go get two more made, and he hid them out behind his house there in East Jerusalem. And so if you want to see the stones, we'd take our bus over there and see those stones behind Gerson Solomon's house. Also, we're here at the Temple Institute. This is run by Chaim Richmond, one of the rabbis there, and I visited the Temple Institute years ago before they were even in this building here. They were in an old little building in the Jewish Quarter. Now they got a big, beautiful building here where they have all the preparations made for the coming third temple. This is Chaim Richmond showing the ephod that the priests wear. There's a mannequin there inside the Temple Institute that has the high priest robe on display, and it has this golden crown. Of course, it has the bells and pomegranates on the hem, all the different things that are prescribed by the Bible. There's a model of the third temple there. This little inset picture is from inside the rabbinical tunnel. They have made a model of the new temple sitting next door to the Dome of the Rock. So this is another illustration. Of course, the third temple will be much larger than the Dome of the Rock, and that's significant. But at least there are some of the people that recognize that the dome does not have to be taken down. In the Temple Institute, you will see the altar of incense that's already made, the table of showbread there on your right. We see all the furnishings and vessels and instruments of the third temple. There's golden shovels, brass shovels for handling the ashes. There's vessels for carrying the blood of the sacrifices. There's harps and lyres and horns and all the various instruments that are including the golden menorah. Now, the golden menorah has been rebuilt with $2 million worth of gold. It's on public display there in the Jewish quarter now. And, of course, most of you have heard about the ashes of the red heifer from the book of Numbers, chapter 19. The ashes of the heifer were used to create a holy water to sprinkle the tabernacle, the sanctuary, and the people, the priests, to sanctify them. And we know right now there's 5 red heifers that are candidates to be used for that red heifer sacrifice. This is an old picture of several years ago when the rabbis were practicing making a red heifer sacrifice. This is not an actual red heifer sacrifice, but it's a practice run. And if you'll notice the locations, it's upon Mount Olivet, above the Temple Mount. They actually, in ancient times, prepared their sacrifices up close to Bethany, and they hauled them across the valley into the eastern gate into the temple site. And here we are, looking at an ancient map where they depict Jerusalem as the center of the world. That the left leaf, of course, represents Europe. The right leaf represents Asia. The bottom leaf represents Africa. And in many realities, Jerusalem is the city of the world because it's the center of a lot of trade routes, merchant routes, and such. Here's an old city in the Jewish quarter. Here's some of the markets that we see throughout the old city of Jerusalem. Everywhere you look, you're going to see Israeli soldiers are always out there to keep the peace because there's a lot of threats of terrorism. Eating, there's cafes of all kinds. If you love Middle Eastern food, you will love their shawarma and falafel. It's all delicious. We eat at this place right next door to the Temple Institute. Now here we are at the Zion Gate. This comes out the south end of the old city, and as I already mentioned, it is where the Church of the Dormition. I want to say that this is an absolute heresy. Mary is not said in the Bible to have ascended into heaven. She died just like all the rest of us, and she's in heaven like all the rest of us. She is not an intercessor for the church. She doesn't hear our prayers, and this is all a false gospel. This Mariology is all a false gospel, but it's there nevertheless. But right below the Church of the Dormition is the upper room. We're looking at the old building. That door up the top of those stairs is coming out of the upper room, and that hallway in the center of this picture is the downstairs of that building, and that's where there is a synagogue in that lower floor, and it has the tomb of King David. Of course, nobody knows where the corpse of David is. It's been gone for centuries, but for many, probably over 2,000 years, it has been recognized as the place of his tomb. This is upstairs in the upper room. Of course, this building has been renovated several times over the centuries because it has fell into disarray. At one time, the Muslims actually occupied this room, but now the tour group's going here to see. This is the room where Jesus had his Last Supper with his 12 disciples. He left this room and went to Gethsemane to pray, and of course he went from there to Caiaphas' house and on to his crucifixion at Golgotha after going through Pilate's hall. But also, this is the room where the 120 met for 10 days of prayer and seeking God, and this is where the Holy Ghost fell on the day of Pentecost, and they received the Holy Ghost, speaking with other tongues as the Spirit of God gave them the utterance. So this is where the Mother Church was born. The Mother Church is not Rome. The Mother Church is Jerusalem, and this is where the Mother Church was born. Jerusalem, which is above, is the mother of us all. All the saints that were born of the Spirit on the day of Pentecost, that is the Mother Church. Downstairs we see this synagogue and this marking place where they say this is the tomb of David. And just below this, on the foothill of Zion, is another Catholic church, and it marks the spot where Caiaphas, the high priest house, once stood, looking out across the city of David from the house of Caiaphas. These steps, they say Jesus actually walked up these stone steps in his time to Caiaphas' house and walked back down these steps to Gethsemane. So at least twice we know Jesus' feet touched these very stones. Here we are in a cistern underneath Caiaphas' house. They believe that Jesus was held in hold in this cistern. It was effectively a prison for Jesus in the hours he was held by Caiaphas and high priest. Here's a little monument on the outside of Caiaphas to mark where Peter betrayed Christ. Peter's sitting there, two young women there, and then a Roman centurion. On the top of this post is a rooster that we know crowed and convicted Peter of his sin. Jesus had said, before the cock crows, you'll deny me thrice. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Amazingly, on one of my trips, I was walking on the ramparts of the southern wall. I was on the top of the wall above the Zion Gate, walking toward the Temple Mount. I looked down to the right at Caiaphas' house. This is the yard behind Caiaphas' house. And I saw a chicken, and I heard him crowing. And I took this little video, and I said, oh, my word, I wonder if that chicken is a descendant of the rooster that preached to Peter 2,000 years ago. It's amusing. Now we are looking from Caiaphas' house back toward the Mount of Olives. Up to the left is the Temple Mount. Here's another view of the city of David and the valley of Gehenna, right off of Caiaphas' house. Here is a little explanation of Savika telling us about the city of David as viewed from Caiaphas' house.
One of the names to Mount Moriah was also Zion. But with the time, Mount Zion...
Of course, the view here is, the last view in this video clip is of Gehenna. This is where I think Jesus is going to cast the beast and the false prophet in the lake of fire right here below here. So we're going to go back from Caiaphas back to the Temple Mount. We're going to go over to the southern slopes of the Temple Mount, the southern steps. We're going to see the sites down here. Most of these are in ruins now, but there are steps that at one time there was, Solomon's porch was up on top side of the mountain where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now is. There used to be gates on this wall, and the Jews would buy their sacrifices and bring them to these steps. They would bathe in the ritual baths, and they would take their sacrifices up these steps and present them to the Lord on the top of the mountain. Here we are lecturing to the group and telling about all these events here, and we're going to see these ritual baths. I want you to see this little short clip as we pan around here and look at all these ritual baths. I personally believe that when Peter preached on the day of Pentecost, the Bible said there was 3,000 converted the first day and 5,000 later in the week. That's 8,000 people that had to be baptized because of his message. And I think this is the closest site, absolutely the closest site to the upper room. So I believe, as many people do, that Peter baptized about 8,000 people in the ritual baths here on the southern slopes of the Temple Mount. 8,000 people baptized on the southern slopes of the Temple Mount. Here we are on the southwestern corner of that Temple Mount. And from an aerial view, you can see the ritual baths if you zoom in and look close. Up on the top left corner is a place where the trumpeter, the Jewish trumpeter, used to sound the call to prayer. And there's actually an ancient stone fallen off that mount from the Roman times, and it marks the place of the trumpeter. Here's that corner again. You see a rough rock poking out of the wall there. That was one time an arch and a set of stairs that's marked as called Robinson's Arch. This is where the people go into the Wailing Wall. To the left, they go through security gates there. If you go to the right off of this driveway, you go through the Dung Gate into the city of David. We're looking over at the Mount of Olives to the east. This is, again, the Robinson's Arch sticking out of the wall there, the trumpeter's place up at the corner. If you look down, when the Romans destroyed the Holy Temple, they threw everything on the Temple Mount over the wall to the ground. These stones fell 2,000 years ago when the Romans tore down the temple and everything was standing on the top of the Temple Mount. One of the stones they felt was marked in the Hebrew language to the place of trumpeting. That means that the Jews were on this mountain 2,000 years ago blowing a horn to the call of prayer. Some people say the Jews never owned this Temple Mount, but they absolutely were. And here's another view of the western wall, the ramp up there. We go up that ramp and visit the Temple Mount when we have an opportunity. In 1967, that's when the Israelis took over this. The Muslims still had houses on this neighborhood, but they immediately began to come here to pray, and sooner or later they tore down all those Muslim houses and made this a great plaza to pray on. Over in the corner, you see that arch where they have their synagogue there. They got all kind of their Torahs and prayer books in there. Right inside that is kind of like a library. And we know they're building all these underground tunnels here, and they've made an entrance so the tourists can go and see, and even the locals go in there because a lot of locals go downstairs to pray. I want you to watch this video that does a panorama of the Prayer Wall Plaza. So we'll go an entrance into the Temple Mount. We're going down underground. Here's a picture inside the rabbinical terminal as we go looking to see what they've done. As we walk down the western wall, we're going to see stones that was laid in the days of Solomon. That wall right there was one stone. It was 50 feet long. I don't know, about 8 or 10 feet tall. Unimaginable how this stone ever got laid in place, but it was cut so perfectly that there was not even room for a piece of paper between it and the next stone. Nobody knows how they managed to pull this off. They excavated little by little. They put up steel support walls while they went further and further. Now they go down there to pray because it is in fact closer to the holy place than even the prayer wall. The walls have gone all the way down to the Muslim quarter on the north, and they've built a multi-million-dollar Jewish synagogue right in the area where Solomon's entrance once was, and they reorganized the Jewish Sanhedrin. You remember in the Old Testament, Moses chose 70 elders of Israel. So now we have the 70 elders of Israel again called the Sanhedrin. They meet in this synagogue underground on a regular basis, and of course other people come here to pray and to study. Other views of the Wailing Wall. People put their prayer requests on pieces of paper and they stuff them in the cracks of the Wailing Wall. Every month or so they come and clean out those cracks and they bury those prayers on Mount Olive. There's the dung gate coming off of the Prayer Wall Plaza down to the city of David. The Gihon Springs. This is a map of the Gihon Springs off the southern end of the Temple Mount. It was a primary source of water. The Hezekiah Tunnel was built in his day so that the enemy armies could not get a hold of their water supply. This is another view on the south end of the Temple Mount. This is the valley of Gehenna, Tophet, Hinnom, Hades, the ancient sacrificial sites to Moloch. This was Jerusalem's dump in its day, and the south end of Mount Zion below the Temple Mount in the city of David. This windmill here, right outside the old city, marks a place. It's called the Montefiore Windmill. This is where the first Jewish community was built. In the old days, the Jews did not live outside the old city. This was the first community outside the old city. It's a very important place. During the Ottoman Empire, it was a major step of progress for the Jews. Then we go to visit the Knesset, which is the Israeli government. This is their parliament chambers in the modern city of Jerusalem. We go here. Most of the groups do not visit Knesset. I always insist on going because I want the people to see where the government operates. We go inside the quarters. Benjamin Netanyahu and all the members of the Knesset are in here. This is where they conduct their business. This is where they declare war. Here's one of the conference rooms we went into. And across the street from the Knesset is the National Menorah. It is, I think that was a gift to the state of Israel. And then we go to the Israeli Museum and the Shrine of the Book. The Shrine of the Book and the Israel Museum. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are. There's a model of ancient Jerusalem here. There's hundreds and perhaps thousands of artifacts, both written documents and pottery and shards and instruments of war and jewelry and coins, etc., all kind of things from the past. Then we go to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum on the south side of the city. It is a very sobering place. It's a multi-million-dollar installation, and they have memories of the 6 million Jews that were put to death in the World War II Holocaust by Hitler and Poland and other perpetrators of that time. And they have the pictures and memorabilia from 6 million Jews. There's all kind of things from shoes and clothes, eyeglasses, hats, books, photographs, all kind of memorabilia of people that were killed, and of course memories from the Nazi Empire that was responsible for all these atrocities. And then there's a little underground museum where it's a memorial to all the hundreds of thousands of children that were put to death in the Holocaust. and it turns dark when you walk through here, and there's just stars flickering, and there's a audio recording of the names of all the children. It takes several days to read the names of all the children were put to death during the Holocaust. In this field out here, there's trees planted to commemorate what they call righteous Gentiles. Some of you remember the story of Oskar Schindler, who helped to save 1,200 Jews from the Holocaust. He has a tree here in this garden. Corrie ten Boom, some of the others they have memorials in this garden. And then outside of the Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, it's adjacent to Mount Herzl, which is a large cemetery. It's a huge national cemetery in Jerusalem, and I've visited in here. We've seen the graves of Yitzhak and Leah Rabin. He was a prime minister that was assassinated. You see the grave of Theodor Herzl, who was the father of Zionism. People like Golda Meir, who was the prime minister. Ariel Sharon was a prime minister. So many other important people in Israeli history are buried here in Mount Herzl. As we leave to go see Bethlehem, we're going to pass through the south end of Jerusalem. We're going to see these security fences, 20 feet high cement walls meant to keep terrorism out of Jerusalem proper from East Jerusalem, because it was such a major problem. So many terrorist acts were being committed from East Jerusalem. They put this wall up. Well, it runs all the way down to Bethlehem. We're going to see this wall several times as we drive down to Bethlehem. We're going to have to go through the wall to see Bethlehem. We're going to have to, our Jewish guide's going to be left behind. We're going to take up an Arab guide to tour us around into Bethlehem. This is the fields. Of course, the fields were once barren in Jesus' time when he was born, but now they've grown up with all kind of houses and apartments and condominiums. And here's another view of the shepherd's field just outside of Bethlehem, looking northward back toward Jerusalem. And in the shepherd's field, there are many caves, and of course, great speculation that the shepherds that watched over their flocks by night at the birth of Jesus, they were staying in the caves at night for shelter. And so we go into one of these caves and we sing some Christmas hymns, and we tell the Bible story of how the shepherds were watching over the flocks by night when the angels appeared and said, good tidings of great joy, and the whole story. We read the Bible story. And then we go to Bethlehem, to Manger Square, it's called, right next to the Church of the Nativity. Especially in the month of November, December, around Christmas time, the multitudes are vast. Tens of thousands of people see Bethlehem at Christmas time. Here's a friend of mine at the Nissan gift shop there, Johnny Casey. He's been following me for many years. He's got all my Bible studies, and we've talked at great length. He and his wife come visit me in Jerusalem when we were there, and we've had a great rapport for many years. And he's helped us get into the Church of the Nativity. One time when the crowds were so big, he helped us get into the backside of the Church of the Nativity, and we saw a different cave where Joseph and Mary might have stayed. If you know, on the Church of the Nativity, there's a little bitty door right down in the middle. The door is not tall enough for a human to walk through. It's short. It's only maybe 4 feet or so. And the reason they did that is because in ancient times, enemy armies would come through here on horseback, and they would invade this sanctuary and do destruction in there, and so they closed it up so it could not be entered in by horse. And so everybody that goes in to see the Church of the Nativity has to stoop down and go through this door. This picture obviously is when probably taken early in the morning at night before the people get here, because during the day it's packed out with people. The last few times we were there, it was under renovation, had scaffolding everywhere as they renovated this building. Hundreds and hundreds of people stand in line to see the place where Jesus was born, which is in a little cave underneath the platform of the Church of the Nativity. We go down here and wait in line, and finally we see this place. It looks a little bit like a fireplace, but there's a silver star on the ground, and they say this is the place where Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. And I told you how that we went in the backside one year and saw this cave. They claim this, back in this cave, is where Mary and Joseph stayed with Jesus in Bethlehem. And when we leave Bethlehem, we don't go to Hebron because it's under Palestinian control. It's not a very safe place to go. This is an old ancient picture of Hebron before it was turned into a modern city. But I want to talk about Hebron because it is significant in Bible prophecy. The Bible said that Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah here, and this is where he buried Sarah. So in time, Both Abraham and Sarah were buried here in Hebron. Isaac and Rebekah are buried in Hebron. And Jacob and Leah are buried here. And not only that, but David was anointed to be the king of Israel right here in Hebron back in his time. And so it is very significant. The only problem is today it is controlled by the Palestinians. It's behind the dividing wall. And today there's 700,000 Muslims living in Hebron to only 700 Jews. And there's a lot of tension. Even in this building, there's tension between Islamists and Jews and Christians. So we don't go there because it's not a happy place to be. Now we're going back up toward Jerusalem. From the south, we're looking up at the foothills of Jerusalem. Again, the Church of the Dormition. Up here in the center of this picture would be where the upper room and the tomb of David is. And this bottom of the picture is the Valley of Gehenna. Now, this is from the Israeli Museum. There is a full-size model of the ancient city of Jerusalem in Jesus' time. It's out on the landscape there. These buildings are all maybe a foot and a half tall, and it's like you can see the whole city of Jerusalem in ancient times. It's sitting out there on a lot. All right, we're looking at some of the marketplaces as we go back into the old city. Here's a notable place in the Jewish quarter. It's called the Cardo. In Jesus' day, there were marketplaces right here on either side of these pillars. These stone streets here was the oldest street in the city of Jerusalem. Jesus' feet actually walked on this street. It's called the Cardo. This is an old stone wall that was excavated. It was built in the Old Testament times of King Hezekiah. It's called the Hezekiah Wall, and it went all the way around the old city in its day. Here is a view of the Pool of Bethesda. Of course, a lot of these buildings have been built since Jesus' time, but in that pool down at the bottom there is where Jesus healed the man who had been sick all of his lifetime, and he tried to get in when the waters were troubled. Here is a picture I took of a bunch of children playing in the Jewish quarter, and it is a fulfillment of Bible prophecies from the book of Zechariah, chapter 8 and 5. The Bible said, "And the streets of the city shall be filled with boys and girls playing in the streets thereof." The significance of that is that Ezekiel 37 prophesied that Israel would be raised from the dead, as it were. The valley of the dry bones would come back to life, and that's exactly what's happened in Jerusalem. Here's another picture of all the Jewish soldiers patrolling the streets. We're back at the Jaffa gate on the west side of the town now, and this entrance comes from the side. Down to the right is the metropolitan city. We're going down out of the gate into the Mamilla Mall, but this is a view from the west. When you go into the Jaffa gate, you're going into the Armenian quarters. On the right, there's the Citadel of David. To the left is going to be the Christian quarters, and off in the distance is the Jewish quarter. There's another view of the Citadel of David. The Citadel has got a tower there. When you walk up and get on top of that tower, you have a 360-degree view of the entire city of Jerusalem. Coming out of the Jaffa Gate down to the Mamilla Mall, here are Jews that have been up at the holy places celebrating the Sabbath, and now they're going home for the day. And we spend some time around the Mamilla Mall. One of the places I like here is the Aroma Cafe. They've got the best hot chocolate in the world there, and I like to take my groups there every year to visit that and get some hot chocolate. And of course, people like to shop in the nice stores there. Here's a picture of the Jerusalem light rail. It runs north and south through the city of Jerusalem today, but their plans are to expand this throughout the city. And we're back now to the Olivet. We're going to go from the eastern gate to the Garden of Gethsemane and look at these olive trees, because these olive trees, they say, are anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 years old. They believe that some of these trees were definitely standing even in the days of Jesus. Some of these trees Jesus prayed under in Gethsemane, and they're still bearing fruit 2,000 years later. As we leave down into the valley, Kidron Valley, the valley of Jehoshaphat, we see the tomb of Absalom and the tomb of Zechariah, the city of David. And the city of David, they are having some of the most modern excavations now. They claim they've found ruins from a royal palace. They believe it was the palace of David. Down here in this area, it's an exciting thing. They've found coins and vessels and all kind of artifacts that from the period of David and other kings of Israel. And as you look across the city of David, from the city of David to the south, that mountain is called the Hill of Evil Counsel. And that's where Judas Iscariot went the night he collected his 30 pieces of silver from Caiaphas and the high priests. Not only is it the place where Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, Absalom is said to have plotted to betray his own father David on this mountain, and Solomon built altars to Moloch for one of his heathen wives. So this mountain has got a bad reputation, and would you know it, that's where the United Nations, this is an old picture of the United Nations installation there. It's the UNTSO, which is the United Nations Troop Supervision Organization. They claim they're keeping the peace, but anybody should know the United Nations is no friend of Israel. And I'm showing you a modern picture of the United Nations installation here. Now we're going to go up the eastern wall to the Lion Gate, because we're going to go down the Via Dolorosa and see the path that Jesus walked. He came from Caiaphas' house up to Gethsemane area again and went in this Lion Gate into what is now the Muslim quarter. It wasn't Muslims in Jesus' day, but it was, we call it now the Via Dolorosa. It's the path that he took. We're going to visit the place where Pilate's hall was, and we're going to visit the Church of the Flagellation, which shows where he was scourged. This is the Lion Gate. In ancient times, Jesus' time, the temple was there in front of the eastern gate, and on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount was the fortress of Antonio. And this is where Pilate's hall was. Pilate's hall was in the vicinity of this red arrow here. And here is an old picture before this building was excavated. I'm going to read from the book of John, chapter 19. The Bible said, "Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe." So this is where Jesus was scourged, and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they smote him with their hands. Pilate therefore went forth again and saith unto them, "Behold, I bring him forth unto you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." We think that right here in this area of this building is where Pilate made this pronouncement on Jesus Christ. Verse 5 said, "Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said unto them, Behold the man, behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Take ye him, crucify him, for I find no fault in him." So we believe, historians and archaeologists say, this arch is part of that building of Pilate's hall. They call it the Ecce Homo arch. This is believed to be where Pilate said, "Behold the man." Ecce Homo means behold the man. So when we see this, and this is on the Via Dolorosa, this is where Pilate condemned Jesus. This is in the Church of the Flagellation, right in that vicinity. And this old stone pavement, you can see markings where Roman soldiers played games, where they cast lots for their criminals' belongings. And there's even speculation that some of these might have been inscribed the night they cast lots for Jesus' robes. Now we're going up we're headed from the Lion Gate westward down to the old city quarters, and then we're going to go northward to the right out the Damascus Gate. This is the Via Dolorosa. Jesus carried his cross. Joseph of Arimathea helped him carry his cross up this. He stumbled on this pavement. Now the Catholics have a church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We visit it, but we don't believe at all that this is where Jesus died or where he was buried. The Catholic Church built this church back in the days of Constantine of Rome. Helene, his mother, commissioned this church to be built. This inside the church is this tomb. It's very elaborate, very ornate, and all the facts of the matter are wrong about it. It's full of lies. In fact, my personal opinion, this place is very evil. It's very unclean spirits in this building. I feel every time I go there, I don't like this building, and I don't think at all this is where Jesus died. They have a slab there where they think Jesus' body was prepared, and everybody goes and kisses that slab, which is an abomination. But it's an amazing thing. But anyway, we pass by this, but we go out the Damascus Gate because we have reason to believe that outside the Damascus Gate on the north is in fact the place of the skull, Golgotha, the place of the skull where Jesus died. And next to the skull is a garden, and in the garden is a tomb. And that's what the Bible said. We're going to see that coming out of the north gate behind this photograph. As we look backwards, we find the garden tomb is on the right. And we see this picture. I want you to see this. This is an old, probably 100-year-old picture, black and white, of this place outside the north gate of Jerusalem. It's called the place of the skull. You can see two eyes, you see a chin, and what appears to be a mouth. It's an ugly looking skull, but the story goes is that in ancient times the Romans crucified all their criminals right here on this property. You see the camel trains walking below. This was a trade route from Europe and Asia all the way down to Africa. There was a huge amount of traffic on this highway, and the Romans made a spectacle of their criminals by crucifying them in this place. So we believe that Jesus' cross stood right here in this lot, in this field, or whatever you call it, in front of the place of the skull. That's probably where Jesus died, and he was two criminals to either side. But to the left of him, the Bible said, now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden there was a new sepulchre where never a man was laid. There they laid Jesus, therefore, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. And you got to see this. This is the garden, and this is the garden tomb. And we really believe this is where Jesus was crucified. They built a Muslim bus station here, and that's an asphalt pavement on that same field where Jesus was buried. It's almost a blasphemy. It's an abominable thing. This picture was taken before they built a minaret. Now there's a minaret there, and they issue calls to prayer all day long. It's loud, loud, loud. It's just unbelievable. It's just a nuisance. It's offensive. It's blasphemous. We're trying to tell the story of Jesus here in the garden, and you can't hear yourself think because the minarets are screaming the Muslim prayers so loud. Here's another picture from the businesses in East Jerusalem. Looking at in the backyard there is the place of the skull. But next to that is the garden tomb, and this is where we find that place where Jesus laid. And millions of visitors see this place every year. We go inside there where Jesus laid, and here's what it looks like. There's a slab in there where somehow or another Jesus' body was laid. And as you know, Mary Magdalene and the ladies came back to prepare his body, and they found that he was not there, and they were very alarmed. There was angels in this room, and they said, "Why seek ye the living among the dead? He's not here, he's risen." And I can attest to you that I've been inside it myself, and I can tell you of a truth, he is not there. Jesus is alive forevermore. And we know he's coming back. The Bible said after 50 days after he rose, he ascended in the clouds over Bethany, and the angels appeared to the disciples at that time and said, why stand you here gazing into the heavens? This same Jesus you've seen going away is going to come back just like this. And so we know Jesus is coming back in the clouds, and he's coming to the eastern gate. Paul talked about it in Thessalonians and Corinthians. We're going to know Jesus is going to come in a moment, a twinkling eye. The dead in Christ are going to rise, and we which are alive and remaining will be called up to meet him in the air. We're going to come in the clouds of glory to fight with him the battle of Armageddon, defeat the beast and the false prophet and all the enemies at Armageddon. He's going to take over Jerusalem for 1,000 years and rule on this earth for 1,000 years. And then after that, heaven and earth are going to pass away, and we're going to see the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem for all the ages of eternity. So this is the most important, this is the greatest story ever told. And I always like to just pause and reflect right here north of the Dome of the Rock. We're on the Temple Mount. Off to the right of this picture is the dome. Right in front of us is the top edge of the eastern gate. The trees in the far distance are on Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane. I believe this is where we're going to see Jesus with his feet on the ground for the first time, because the Bible said when Jesus comes back, the Mount of Olives is going to split to the north and the south. So that means it's going to split to the left and to the right. In this picture, that gate is going to break open, and Jesus is going to come through there with all of his saints and angels, and we're going to stand on top of this mountain, and we're going to crown him King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's going to defeat the beast and the false prophet, and all the enemies of God and Israel and his church are going to be destroyed at this time, and for 1,000 years Jesus is going to rule the world. The prophet John said that temple will stand, but it's going to finally be trodden down. The rest of this, only the building is going to be used by the Jews for a little while, and then the Gentiles are going to trot it down, and they're going to take over all Jerusalem until Jesus comes back and saves the day. And we know that Zechariah tells us that Messiah is going to build his own temple. So there will be a new fourth temple there, and it will stand for 1,000 years because it's going to be the home of Jesus Christ. And David will be a prince under him for 1,000 years over the new 12 tribes of Israel in Jerusalem. This is all a very exciting story to tell, and we always end our visit to the garden tomb. And in the garden, we celebrate communion. We worship the Lord near his empty tomb. He's risen. He's not here. This is an emotional experience for most people. One year we met in one corner of the garden and happened to have a keyboard that day, and I sang a song about Jerusalem. And I'll end this program with this and remind you, Jesus is coming back, and we're all going to be with him in a new Jerusalem. Listen to this song.
Last night as I lay sleeping, there came a dream so fair. I stood in old Jerusalem, beside the temple there. I heard the children singing, ever as they sang. I thought the voice of angels, heaven answering. I thought the voice of angels from heaven answering. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, lift up your gates and sing Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna to your King. And then I thought my dream was changed. The streets no longer rain. Us were the glad hosannas the little children sang. The sun grew dark in mystery. The morn was cold and chill as the shadow of the cross arose upon a lonely hill. As the shadow of the cross arose upon a lonely hill. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, hark how the angels sing. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna to your King. And once again the scene was changed. New earth there seemed to be. I saw a holy city beside the timeless sea. The light of God was on its streets. The gates swing open wide, and all who would might enter, and no one was denied. No need of moon or stars by night, or sun to shine by day. It was the new Jerusalem that would not pass away. It was the new Jerusalem that would not pass away. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, sing, sing for the night is yours.
watching. Please like and share and follow me on Facebook, MeWe, Gab, CloudHub, BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, Telegram, Truth Social, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Visit my website at KenRaggio.com for thousands of pages of Bible articles on every subject. Subscribe to receive my daily Bible studies by email. Go to Amazon, search for books by Ken Raggio. You'll see my daily Bible companion, 5,000 lessons almost from every chapter of the Bible, 2-volume set, Old and New Testaments. Get the Daniel prophecies, God's plan for the last days, 726 pages with footnotes, 175 photos, one of the most powerful prophecy teachings anywhere. Get the greatest doctrines of the Bible. Get Praying on Purpose, praying for results, how men prevail with God. Get Long Winding Road, my very personal story, and Treasures of Darkness, how to see the glory of God in your darkest trials. Click the link below if you want all 9 books for only $125 here in the United States only. And please donate through the link below, and then share these videos with your friends. And I'll see you next time. Good night.